The sun was beginning its slow descent over the dusty western plains, painting the sky in shades of gold, crimson, and violet. The wind stirred the tall prairie grass, carrying with it the faint scent of horses, leather, and smoke from distant chimneys. She stood a few feet away from him, her heart hammering as though it wanted to break free from her chest. For months, she had admired him from afar, the strong, rugged cowboy whose presence commanded the attention of everyone around him. Yet here she was, standing so close, feeling the heat of his body without any pretense between them, and it both terrified and thrilled her. Her fingers itched to reach out, to close the small distance that remained between them, but she held back, savoring the tension in the air. Every day she had watched him work on the ranch, his movements precise, confident, and utterly captivating. She had noticed how he handled the horses with care, how he repaired fences with a methodical patience, how even the village folk, who often tested his temper, seemed to respect him instinctively. There had always been a mystery about him, a quiet power tempered with honor, and tonight, standing this close, she felt that power brush against her own resolve. "No one's ever kissed me there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a mixture of fear, audacity, and a strange yearning. The words seemed to hang in the golden light, suspended in the space between them, as if daring the wind to carry them away. She watched his eyes widen, the calm, confident gaze faltering for a split second. It was rare to see him unsteady, and in that moment, she felt both the thrill of triumph and the weight of responsibility that came with wielding such power over someone so strong. His jaw tightened, his hands instinctively tightening into fists at his sides. She could see the conflict etched across his rugged features, the pull between desire and restraint, curiosity and discipline. He wanted to act, to lean closer, to close the space that had suddenly shrunk between them. But he didn't. His eyes darted briefly away, as if seeking guidance from the horizon, the wind, or some invisible code that governed his sense of honor. She could feel the tension radiating off him like heat, and it made her pulse quicken. She took a step closer, her heart threatening to burst with every movement. Her hand brushed lightly against his arm, testing, exploring, a touch that was daring yet delicate. He flinched, and she saw the shiver run through him, not from fear, but from the potent cocktail of emotion he was struggling to contain. Every muscle in his body seemed to hum with suppressed energy, a conflict between yielding to instinct and holding firm. She had never felt such a rush of power before, the ability to provoke such raw emotion in someone who seemed untouchable. Yet beneath her daring, there was vulnerability. She felt naked in her own boldness, exposing a part of herself that she had hidden for far too long. There was a risk in her actions, a risk that he could reject her entirely, that her attempt at closeness could end in humiliation. But she refused to step back. This was a moment she could not let slip away, a chance to bridge the distance between admiration and connection. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, but in that space, there was only him, her, and the tension that crackled like lightning between their hearts. He finally spoke, his voice low and measured, carrying both warning and fascination. "You shouldn't be saying things like that," he said, though there was no anger, only the weight of restraint. She smiled faintly, her chest rising with excitement and fear. His reaction, hesitation, confusion, and the faintest trace of longing, was more intoxicating than anything she had imagined. It was proof that he was human, that even someone so strong, so confident, could feel the stirrings of desire and uncertainty. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the prairie, she stepped even closer, letting her hand brush against him again, more insistently this time. He stiffened but did not pull away, and she knew she had touched a chord within him. There was a line between them, drawn by principles and restraint, yet she felt its tremors, its vulnerability, and she smiled to herself. For the first time, she realized that power wasn't always in strength or skill. It could also come from daring to be vulnerable, to provoke emotion, and to take the first step where no one else had dared. In that golden moment, with the wind whispering across the plains and the world narrowing down to the space they shared, she felt the exhilaration of possibility. The cowboy, unshakable to everyone else, was shaken under her gaze, and she knew this night would change everything. And though neither of them moved past the line, the tension, the longing, and the unspoken promise hung heavy in the air, a silent vow that this story was only just beginning. The prairie wind had grown colder, carrying the scent of dust, grass, and the distant smoke of evening fires. She could feel her pulse in her throat as she stepped closer to him, closing the space she had dared to enter only moments before. His posture stiffened as her hand brushed his arm again, this time more insistently. She could feel the tremor in his muscles under her touch, a subtle shaking, like the quiet ripple of a horse startled by wind, and it sent a shiver up her spine. It was a reaction she had not expected, a crack in the cowboy's usually unshakable composure. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, yet betraying the slightest hesitation. His eyes, sharp and alert moments ago, now flickered with a mixture of surprise and vulnerability. He was a man of discipline, used to command and respect, but here, in the quiet evening light of the open plains, he felt exposed, unsteady, caught off guard by her daring. I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. She let her fingers rest lightly on his chest, testing the boundary between him and herself, sensing the shiver that ran through him. She could see it in the way his hands tightened at his sides, the slight shift of his weight as though every instinct screamed to pull away, but didn't. He was resisting, struggling against an impulse she could feel as strongly as he did. The tension between them thickened, dense and almost tangible, like the humid air before a storm. Her heart raced, each beat echoing in her ears, as she traced a line of courage she didn't know she possessed. She had always been bold, but this was different. This was daring with purpose, challenging a man who had always seemed untouchable, forcing him to confront emotions he had long kept in check. He swallowed hard, jaw tightening as his gaze met hers. The prairie around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the space between her and him charged with anticipation. She could feel the vibration of his tension, the silent struggle he fought to maintain control. He wanted to react, to reach for her, to close the distance fully, but he couldn't, not yet. Something held him back. A code, a principle, or perhaps the fear of rushing what they had only just begun to touch. I can't, he finally whispered, though the words were almost drowned out by the wind. His voice carried restraint, respect, and a hint of longing that made her pulse jump. He stepped back subtly, creating a small gap between them, but he didn't look away. The fire of his gaze remained fixed on her, acknowledging her presence, her audacity, and her effect on him. It was not rejection, it was caution, restraint, and something far more compelling. She studied him, her breath catching. There was a strength in his hesitation, a depth of character that made her want to push and yet respect the line he drew. She realized that this moment was as much about him as it was about her. Her daring had shaken him, forced him to confront emotions he had rarely admitted, and in that, she felt a strange triumph, not over him, but with him, as if their unspoken struggle had drawn them into a shared space of vulnerability. Taking a tentative step closer, she let her hand linger against his chest again, watching the subtle rise and fall of his breathing. He trembled under her touch, and she felt the weight of the tension pressing against them both. Every muscle in his body seemed poised between yielding and restraint, a quiet battle that mirrored the storm of emotion within her own heart. It was intoxicating, a dance of desire and discipline, of courage and caution. I won't force you, she whispered, more to herself than to him, acknowledging the fragile balance between audacity and respect. And yet, even in that statement, there was a challenge, a quiet demand for honesty, for him to meet her in this vulnerable space, not with force, but with presence. The evening deepened, the light of the sunset softening into twilight. Shadows stretched across the prairie, painting them in shades of gold and violet, the world around them fading as if the universe itself had narrowed its focus. Neither spoke for a long moment, both caught in the silent electricity of the encounter. The cowboy's shivering under her touch was no longer a weakness, it was proof of the intensity of the connection, of the emotional and physical pull that neither could deny. Finally, he exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, and met her gaze fully. It's different, he admitted, voice low and raw with honesty. It was a confession she had hoped to hear, a crack in the armor that made her feel closer to him than she had ever imagined. She smiled faintly, heart racing, knowing that though the tension remained, a bridge had been built, delicate, tentative, but real. And in that quiet twilight, with the prairie wind whispering around them, they stood together, bound by unspoken longing, mutual respect, and a tension that promised their story was far from over. She had forced him to shake under her daring, but in that act, she had awakened something neither of them could ignore, a connection, fragile yet undeniable, that would shape the moments to come. The prairie was quiet now, the sun having dipped below the horizon, leaving only the soft glow of twilight on the wide open plains. Shadows stretched across the dusty earth, and the distant mountains were painted in deep purple and gold. The wind carried the faint smell of grass, leather, and smoke from a nearby fire, swirling gently around them. Inside the small cabin nearby, a lantern flickered, casting warm light across worn wooden walls, but outside, under the vast sky, it was just the two of them, she and the cowboy, standing in the space between daring and restraint. Her hand lingered near his chest, hovering without fully touching, and she could feel the tension in his muscles as clearly as if he had been holding a rope between them. His breathing was steady but strained, each inhale a testament to the struggle he faced between desire and principle. She saw the way his jaw tightened, the faint tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted momentarily to the horizon as if seeking guidance from the mountains themselves. And yet, despite the tremor, the hesitation, the internal battle, he did not pull away. He began, voice low, deliberate, catching on. The weight of the moment, I can't let this happen, not like this. There was a quiet intensity in his words, a mixture of longing and respect that made her chest ache. She understood immediately, it was not rejection. He wasn't turning from her because of indifference, he was holding himself back because he cared. Because he respected the connection they had built, fragile and unspoken as it was. She swallowed hard, letting the silence hang between them. Her chest rose and fell, heart pounding with anticipation and frustration. She had dared, she had pushed, she had tested boundaries, but she realized that this moment wasn't about forcing him, or even about satisfying a sudden desire. It was about understanding the depth of restraint, the courage it took to maintain honor in the face of temptation, and the way that respect could feel more intimate than any touch could ever be. The wind tugged at her hair, and she reached up to tuck a stray strand behind her ear. He watched her do it, eyes full of unspoken emotion, and she felt that familiar pull, the same one that had made her step closer hours before. But now, it was tempered by understanding. She no longer sought to shake him, to provoke a reaction. Instead, she simply wanted him to see her, to meet her vulnerability with honesty. Finally, he exhaled slowly, running a hand across his forehead as if shaking off invisible weight. You're different, he said, voice husky, carrying both awe and hesitation. You've made me feel things I don't usually let myself feel. His gaze softened, lingering on hers with a careful intensity. And yet, I won't rush this. Not tonight. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, one that blended relief, admiration, and a quiet excitement. She understood fully what he meant. The tension, the restraint, the unspoken battle, it was more than desire, it was the foundation of something lasting. And as she watched him, she realized that sometimes, the most powerful connection wasn't in giving in. It was in holding back, in respecting boundaries, and in allowing trust to grow slowly, deliberately. She took a small step closer again, but this time with no audacity, no daring. Just presence. Her hand hovered near his arm, brushing lightly, testing the air between them. He flinched slightly at first but did not retreat. Instead, he let her presence sink in, allowing the unspoken intimacy to deepen without force or pressure. The shiver she had caused in him earlier was still there, subtle, quiet, but now accompanied by understanding and shared awareness. The prairie sky deepened into indigo, stars beginning to pierce the velvet darkness. The cool night air contrasted with the warmth radiating from their proximity, and she felt a connection that transcended words, gestures, or physical touch. It was trust, it was understanding, it was the shared acknowledgement of restraint, longing, and desire balanced perfectly. For hours, they stood like that, silent, breathing, aware of one another in a way that felt almost sacred. Every so often, their hands brushed, just slightly, and each touch sent a ripple through both of them, a reminder that the tension between them was alive, vibrant, and far from over. She realized that the cowboy's refusal, his careful control, was a gift. It showed her respect, depth, and a capacity for patience that few men possessed. And she found herself wanting to match that patience, to honor it, to let the connection unfold on its own terms. Finally, he stepped back just enough to create a small space between them, his eyes soft, steady, and full of something she had never seen before, admiration, care, and quiet longing. Tomorrow, he said softly, we can see where this goes. But tonight is about understanding. She nodded, heart full, and for the first time in weeks, she felt calm, safe, and deeply seen. The stars above seemed to shine brighter as she finally allowed herself to relax, the shiver of anticipation in her chest blending with the thrill of trust and respect. In that moment, she realized that desire, when paired with restraint and honor, could create a bond far stronger than impulsive passion ever could. And as they stood under the vast, silent prairie sky, the tension between them transformed into something enduring, a promise, unspoken yet undeniable, that their story was only beginning.